Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Gameweek preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Gameweek 5. Now this I'm going to try and keep as brief as possible because I've got a very busy week ahead and not a lot of time to get this out. So I was recording again on the earlier side in the game week. I'm recording this on Monday 15th of September, so the Premier League games have all finished, but there are quite a lot of European ties still to be played, plus one or two domestic cup ties still to be played between now and the deadlines. There's still plenty of opportunity for team news and injuries to creep in that could affect our waiver choices. It was obviously a massive week in the waivers last weekend. Lots of new players added into the game. We'll go through who the main players that were coming in and out were on the Waiver Watch when we get into the main section. I think because this episode is going to be on the more brief side, I will try and be very active in the comment answering this week. To be fair, I think if I do say so myself, I did a pretty good job at getting back to most of your questions in the comments last week. So I should have a bit of time on Thursday to have a look through those. So yeah, if you get your questions in on the earlier side, sort of before Friday, then I should pretty much be able to answer all of them. So given how brief I'm going to keep this at times when going through some of the players, then yeah, feel free. If there's anything you think I've missed or anything in respect to your own team that I haven't really covered, then do feel free to message. The waiver deadline this week will be again at the conventional time of 11 a.m. on Friday the 19th of September, ahead of the main game week deadline at 11 a.m. on Saturday. Game week kicks off with Merseyside derby, Liverpool against Everton, the lunchtime kickoff on Saturday, right the way through to the end of Sunday, rounding off with just the small occasion of Arsenal against Manchester City, which should be an interesting one, and one which you'd have to say you'd expect Arsenal to be very decent favourites in that game, so it'd be interesting to see how that one pans out. Yeah, any team news, injury developments, or press conference info are up to date as of now, and of course subject to change. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we do though, a very, very quick mention again, as I did last week. If you want to check out our site, draftfc.co.uk, if you haven't before, then you can sign up totally free on a 1-month free trial at the moment using the code KICKOFF, which will get you totally full access to everything that we've got going on in there, all of the stats and things that I use when creating the content, live game week stuff, personalized predicted lineups to your team and league, global rankings, all sorts of good stuff in there, plus access to the Discord server, which is probably more useful than all of that combined. So yeah, if you've been thinking about it or never even known we've had it before and want to just see what it's all about, then use the code KICKOFF for a 1-month free trial. But yeah, let's jump into Waiver Watch. The players coming in last week. So I forget which league size I looked at these. I think it might have been 10-team leagues because at this stage of the season, at least, they tend to be a lot more active as a cohort. The number one waiver overall was Voltemada on the waivers, 88.4% jump from pretty much a zero up to that point, plus a handful of free agents in. Donnarumma was the other one in, which I doubt would have actually been the number 2 waiver. I think he would have been a second or third pickup for many out there. And given this is a 10-team league, the odds are very, very high that somebody in the league would have felt it necessary to bring in the Manchester City starting goalkeeper. Next was Xavi Simons. Just below that was Kolo Muani. And then we had some more familiar faces that we used to string in and out of the waiver bar. So generally looking around the draft universe, Voltemada 1, Xavi 2, and Kolo Muani 3 was about how the majority of leagues went. In our own league, Kolo Muani went first, then Voltemada, then Xavi. Players making way, a lot of injured players, and a lot of players who have simply transferred out the league. So Shirky, Edison, O'Reilly, Piro, Delap, who we'll mention in a minute in the injured news section, Nico Jackson, Osula and Barry. So reasonable exits there. Yeah, let's talk about some of those injuries. Odegaard's injured his shoulder again, the same one that he sort of banged a couple of weeks ago. Not really sure what was going on there. So I doubt it will keep him out for the weekend, but one to keep an eye on. Tielemans looks to have picked up some sort of significant injury. He's going to be ruled out for a couple of weeks, which is another big miss for Aston Villa. Although some of their other players, like Kamara, for example, could be back this weekend, which they're really going to need. Hinshelwood and De Kuyper both went down for Brighton. Hinshelwood's looks a little bit more serious. He went over on his ankle literally moments after kickoff. De Kuyper clattered into the advertising boards. So could be nothing, could be something. We'll have to wait and see. Ugo Chukwu got sent off for Burnley, 2 yellows, so he'll miss 1 game. Delap, we got confirmation that he is definitely going to be on the longer end of the amount of time we were expecting him to be out. So potentially not much change before Christmas, which is unfortunate. So as we just saw in the Waiver Watch section, lots of managers out there, myself included, had to drop Delap for somebody who is going to play. Aït-Nouri missed out for City. No real clear detail what that's about. Doesn't sound too bad. Vissa was the big one, and again, I'm going to come on to some of those newly transferred players again in a moment, but the news came out the day before that Vissa's knee injury was going to rule him out for about a month. So we're looking at sort of potential return after the next October international break. So we're in a little collection of 4 games here. Game weeks 4, 5, 6, and 7. After game week 7, we've got another international break for game week 8. So I think that is what they've got their eye on for his return. So what it meant was that all of the chat I gave last week about Vissa being the main man at the moment went out the window. Automata came on and may have taken that chance pretty well. And then, of course, Souček got a straight red against Spurs. He's not really in any of your draft teams, but he'll miss 3 games. So has a bit of a knock-on effect for the West Ham squad, which, again, probably doesn't affect your draft teams. The fixtures in Hull for Game Week 5, as I said, Merseyside derby. Brighton against Spurs. Brighton usually do pretty well against Spurs, particularly at home. Burnley Forest, West Ham Palace, Wolves Leeds, United Chelsea, Fulham Brentford on the Saturday. So lots of fairly even matchups. And given the number of draws we saw this week, would not be surprised if we saw a few more next week too. Bournemouth against Newcastle on the Sunday. That should be a fun one. Same with Sunderland Villa, and then of course Arsenal against City. Some of the talking points since we last spoke. Ange has become the new manager of Nottingham Forest, which I think pretty much everyone can see coming, especially when one of his best pals is the nutcase owner of Nottingham Forest. So difficult start, obviously, with only a few days to train, coming straight out of an international break, and then trip to the Emirates to kick things off. So and lots of mentions. Obviously, they lost 3-0. They lost 3-0 last year. That was, in the midst of a good season, settled team under Nuno. So can't really pin any of that result on Ange. I think the negatives were mainly at the back. Some square pegs in round holes there, as they had to make do without Olaina, and they're going to have to make do with him potentially again until Christmas time, similar to Delap. Morato started at left back, not great. When Murillo got injured, that allowed them to move Morato into the centre, and they brought Savona on out at left back, who again had a bit of a stinker really. So next week I think it's a bit more straightforward, because I think we'll see Zinchenko come in at left back and Nico Williams move over to right back. And given that injury to Aina, I think that is a combination we're going to see a fair amount of over the next couple of months. Elsewhere, Bakwa looked good, came on the right when he came on. Calimundo definitely had a bit more about him than Wood, but again, Wood was battling jet lag as much as he was the Arsenal centre-back. McAtee looks okay when he came on too, and there is sort of some history there with Ange being a fan of his. So overall, there are definitely some building blocks in there that Postecoglou will like. To circle back though, the defence worries me. Ange Ball needs to fundamentally adapt to accommodate the personnel that are there, because that back four will get devoured on the counter against even pretty mild opposition. So definitely an interesting experiment for the neutrals to observe. Wolves are bad. I don't think Pereira really has a clue still who his best starting 11 are. The central fulcrum of Andre and Joao Pedro has been so poor. He added Krejci in there to shore things up and make a bit of a 3, which was presumably a specific ploy to combat the Newcastle midfield 3. Didn't really work. There are a lot of very average attackers milling around who are going to struggle when you're only playing like they did against Newcastle. They only started with 2. So if there's only 2 or 3 of these guys in combination, they've got to be good and they've got to click. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to stitch anything together going forward. As I say, there was a vision for an 11 I had in my mind, which was the reason I was higher on Wolves than a lot of others were in pre-season. But that has all but evaporated, and I would not be surprised if Pereira is the next manager for the block. And I've put on there, do wonder, and there's been some talk of Nuno potentially going to West Ham if Potter were to get sacked, but it's not out of the question that he could return to Wolves, just go in there and shore things up. Probably would almost certainly keep them up. So if it got to that, had to see. Yeah, 10 clean sheets in Gameweek 4. Yeah, the only thing really to read into this is the confirmation that defenders are low value. And that may sound completely counterintuitive when we're seeing defenders getting 6, 7, 8 pointers left, right, and centre. But anyone could have wavered in 5 defenders registering clean sheets from the waiver pile this week. So the value of holding on to what's seen to be a star defender or a prize defender is simply not there. If you can bring in any old mid-table defender and have a good chance at a 6-pointer, then you may as well do that and focus your attentions elsewhere. The other thing, finally, I think there are still a lot of unknowns. Now, there always are going to be a fair amount of unknowns in the Premier League around Game Week 4-5, but this feels a little bit more than usual. Obviously, Forest under Andrew, we don't really know how that's going to look. Palace's attack, Villa's attack, Fulham's attack, Wolves in general, West Ham in general. The City Pep Roulette is still spinning pretty fast. So, yeah, there's still a lot to try and puzzle out, which hopefully means we can find some edges in the waiver pile over the next couple of weeks. So very quickly, I'm just going to cast over some of the players, or all of the players that we mentioned in the transfer section last week, because there was a lot of chat. I spent a good chunk of that episode, so let's quickly check in and see how they've done after the single week. Now, Isak wasn't in the squad. Vissa, we've already mentioned, was injured, so that left the door open for Watermada to come and start and get a pretty well-taken debut goal. Now, if you didn't know anything about him, and the first time you sort of saw him was when you saw that 6-foot whatever frame prancing around the pitch, you'd have thought, yeah, this guy's going to be scoring tons of headed goals. He goes and scores one, and it all seems pretty straightforward, but that really isn't his game. I think he scored 2 headed goals in all competitions last season, maybe 1 in the league, in the Bundesliga. So for a guy his size, he's not known for that. So that could be a bit of an anomaly, but still, it was a welcome start, good confidence booster, and he's got no real competition for that spot. He's certainly not going to compete with Asula. So, yeah, for those of you that did snag him off the waivers, then it's kind of, you've landed on your feet there. Kolo Muani started on the bench, and we didn't see him, didn't make an appearance, so I would expect he gets the first proper outing in the Champions League tomorrow against Villarreal. Xavi got his debut and got an assist. Nice floaty and swinging corner for Pap Sarr's header. He looked, as debuts go pretty decent. There's definitely a player there and lots of room to grow. Garnacho did feature in the end, didn't he? I've put on there that he was not fit for those watching, but he did come off the bench. Elliott came off the bench for Villa, but wasn't able to make an impact. Jeremy got his full debut. He was really unlucky not to score. I haven't looked at what his XG was in that game. He missed a couple of absolute sitters. Let's have a look what his XG was. Yeah, 0.74. The majority of that would have been from a couple of big chances, which got blocked. So yeah, bad luck if you picked him up early, but definitely looks like a player there, and definitely he's going to be someone that continues to start. Fernandez for West Ham didn't really do anything as expected. Donnarumma came on, got his debut, decent save in that game. and a clean sheet to kick things off. Can't really ask for more than that. Lamons didn't start, and we got confirmation of that well before the weekend, which I thought was a little unusual. Whether we see him start next week, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm probably going to be putting him in my predicted lineup again. Due to the injury to Strand Larson, we saw Tolu get his first league start for Wolves. We didn't really have a lot of service there. Robbie came off the bench for Sunderland, but again, didn't really do much there. Same with Bakwa. Kevin had a really interesting little cameo towards the end. I think Fulham barely had a shot before he came on, and then there was a little flurry of chances. He looked really lively, and yeah, he's possibly one of the ones on this list who I've gone from not really being that bothered about, not knowing too much about, to suddenly kind of wanting him in my draft team. I think especially if you're in the larger leagues, kind of 11, 12 teams plus, he's definitely got to be worth a punt. And I think if he can do that consistently, they will move Iwobi out of the way to accommodate him. They could even move Iwobi inside somewhere to allow for that, because I don't think you can leave him out of the team if he keeps doing that. Chukwueze wasn't in the squad. I haven't really had any news there. Sancho was on the bench, didn't come on, and the same with Nchape, or whatever he's called, the new Arsenal defender. Into the main picks, a lot of Crystal Palace defenders here: Gay, Lacroix, Mitchell, and Richards. Richards is the easiest way in, just 15% owned, and an away trip to West Ham, as Spurs found, is a decent chance at clean sheet. And given how poor West Ham looked from defending corners, the likes of Lacroix, Gay, and Richards are going to be hot property, not least for their clean sheet potential, but also for their goal scoring potential too. Trippier for Newcastle, I think, is an interesting one. He looks set to just carry on playing. We keep predicting Livramento moving over and Lewis Hall starting, but for whatever reason, Eddie Howe just doesn't fancy it. So Newcastle kick things off, I believe, 3 clean sheets out of 4. So definitely worth a look. And the other team that we're going to have quite a few mentions for here, Aston Villa, despite all of their struggles in attack, again, still pretty decent at the back. I think they themselves have also kept 3 clean sheets. So Cash just 21% owned, and Conser 12% owned, with an away trip to Sunderland, which, as it stands, I don't think we can quite easily just look for those newly promoted teams, particularly away from home, and assume that that's going to be a nice, easy game, because I expect that to be a pretty well-contested match there. And then the final one is Diouf, who, in a way, I think could become fixture-proof. I think he could knock out assists against sort of any opposition, but certainly not going to be picking up anything in the way of clean sheets at the moment, and unlikely to get many defensive contribution points too, which really are dominating early on in the season. In midfield, I've put him right at the top with really high ownership, but if you think 88% for Phil Foden, that means about 1 in 8 leagues out there have got him dropped and in the waiver pile. And given the injuries, I was fully expecting him to start, so it wasn't a surprise for me. And given how high we know his ceiling is, for me, I've still got him at a reasonable position in my overall draft rankings. So never advocated dropping him. And for anyone that's mentioned that he was sitting in their waiver pile when they were considering the likes of Voltemada, Xavi, etc., I've always said to just go for Foden. So if he was there, got to pick him up. Caicedo is becoming a real solid asset. And in fact, he saved my game week this week. I was on for a pretty shoddy score before his 12-point cameo. 44% rostered. I expect that to jump up above 50% this week. With the triple away at Man United, we can pretty much bank that he's going to clock those defensive contribution points again. And if he can just get a few more attacking returns compared to his baseline, then he could put up the sort of numbers that Rodri would have done a couple of years back. Really, really good player, and someone that will certainly be nudging up in my draft rankings when I update them on Thursday. Doku was the other one I was really impressed with, Manchester City. And obviously the fixture where Arsenal isn't ideal, but if you're in average size leagues and beyond, I think he's good enough to be in somebody's midfield. Anderson finally got his defensive contribution 2-pointer, having scored 11 in 3 consecutive weeks, which we could probably expect given the fixture away at Arsenal. Whether we get a bit of a return to the norm with a trip to Burnley, we'll have to wait and see. But I think the way Ange's going to set up, he will likely end up being a bit of a single pivot, so we'll have a lot of defensive work to do. Zubimendi I've put on here not to advocate for, only to mention or to remind me to mention not to bother wavering him in. That is pure knee-jerk FC. He scores about 2 goals every million years, so he's got them now. Don't worry about it. He's not going to do that again. And then finally, Barnes for Newcastle. Fully expecting Newcastle to line up with Gordon and Elanga. Whether Barnes is part of that, whether Gordon's the 9, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. This is in their Champions League game against Barcelona. So I think we could then return, given Gordon will still be banned. I think for their trip to Bournemouth, we'll probably could see the same front three as the weekend with Barnes, Altamada and Murphy, who just continues to impress. He's such an undervalued player. Did a really good job there at the weekend. In attack, Nunez continues to start. Barry isn't starting as quickly as I thought he would, but Beto just doing what he normally does, which is not a lot. So I think Barry's not a million miles away from getting that first start, although whether they choose to do that in the Merseyside derby, possibly not. It could be a game week 6 where he starts. But Thiago for Brentford is the absolute no-brainer. Another attacking return in their game against Chelsea and just 50% owned for a mid-table starting number 9 with very little in the way of competition. Absolutely no-brainer has to be in somebody's draft team. Their trip to Fulham in Gameweek 5, I think, is a pretty good matchup for them on paper. Into Hidden Gems, very quickly, the rest of the Aston Villa defence are in there, Digne and Mings. Anderson for Fulham, another one who's becoming a bit of a defensive contribution giant with that home game against Brentford. Same with Coyote on the flip side of that fixture. Anderson's teammate Bassi is another one. That's probably more just one if you're punting for a clean sheet, because he never really seems to get close to Anderson when it comes to the defensive contributions. And then keep an eye on the De Kuyper injury news, because it could open the door for Kadioglu to start against Tottenham. Rounding off the Hidden Gems list, Xhaka is going to be a near permanent fixture on here, I think, until he crosses that 10% threshold. I think he'll have a good game at home to Villa. Jeremy, who we mentioned, hasn't really hit any heights in terms of his roster percentage. If he'd have scored, if he'd have converted one of those chances at the weekend, I think he would have absolutely skyrocketed. As it stands, I think we'll probably see a modest increase in his ownership this week. So, yeah, if you like the look of him, get in ahead of the curve. King for Fulham continues to start. Nwaneri is the other one, which probably have to wait for some team news before we know whether he's worth bringing in with regards to Odegaard's shoulder injury. There are ways around it in which Nwaneri doesn't start. They could line up with Zubimendi, Rice and Marino. Given the nature of the fixture and knowing Arteta, that is not totally off the cards for him to just put 9 defenders on the pitch. So keep an eye on that one. We might get a bit more of a clue depending on how they line up in the Champions League, which I believe is tomorrow. Okafor for Leeds. There is, for those watching, there is a relic from last week's slide of a little hidden gem tag next to him. Please ignore that. I'm not highlighting him particularly. But for those in larger leagues, I think he will become a regular starting attacker for Leeds. But they are, as we sort of anticipated in pre-season, they are struggling to score goals. Up front, Foster continues to play for Burnley. Nemetra, I think, will come back in to the starting lineup this weekend. We saw Calvert-Lewin come in and do absolutely nothing. Nemetra did come off the bench in that game, so I think he'll be fully fit for the start of the weekend. And then one for the bigger leagues again, Kalimuendo for Nottingham Forest. Really remains to be seen how quickly it happens, but if you were to be pretty objective about who the sort of striker is that Ange Postecoglou would want for Forest, despite his record, I don't think that guy is Chris Wood. I think Kalimuendo could become one of the players that we see in the Ange era really emerge at Forest. Next is our fantastic 4 section, a segment where we're trying to highlight players with pretty low roster percentages who we think could squeeze out a nice tidy 4-pointer for your team. We had a pretty good start when we did them for Game Week 3. Game Week 4, not so good. We had a couple of 3s for Senesi and Cullen, and then Vandenberg and Adams only got 1 point each. Adams, I think, was 1 defensive contribution away from getting the extra 2 points, but still have to call that 4 misses ultimately. We're still, in terms of the overall average, we're on 3 out of 8, overall average 4.1 points per pick so far. And that's due to a couple of big scores from the Gameweek 3 one. So we're clinging on by the skin of our teeth to that 4-point average. We'll have to do better in Gameweek 5. Sticking with a couple, gone for Anderson and Anderson, both players who I think will be popular this week. Modest ownership, I think that will creep up a bit. Van den Berg's in there again, and Adams is in there again. Adams against Newcastle and Van den Berg away to Fulham, I think, will provide better opportunities for them to cross the defensive contribution threshold. So we'll have to see if we can be a bit more successful in Game 5. Predicted lineups, I haven't really done as it stands. I may do them later this evening just to get a few of the swaps in there. I'll properly do those on Wednesday evening, maybe Thursday morning. So they'll be done well in advance of Game Week deadline. So that is it for this episode. Another final reminder, if you've never signed up before and would like to, use the code KICKOFF for a 1-month free trial at draftfc.co.uk. It'll also let you into the Discord channel. We'd love to see you there. If you enjoy the content, be that on YouTube or on the audio, then make sure you are following or subscribed. If you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up as well. And as I said right at the beginning, if you've got any particular questions or queries that haven't really been answered in this episode, which is probably highly likely because I've gone through this at a rate of knots, then do comment below. And as long as you comment before Thursday, I will get to all of them. Elsewhere, give us a follow on X at draft_FC. Those of you that aren't signed up, of course, you can see the lineups on the main draftfc.co.uk main site and just find that from the main menu. This week, I will be travelling down to Cornwall for an annual family holiday. So similar to last year, there will be a little bonus episode for the Game Week 6 preview, which will be coming at you live from my holiday cottage. Those of you may have recalled episode last year with a slightly different background. And so that one will be a really slimmed down, probably like a 10-minute episode. I'll cut a lot of the little segments off the beginning and the end here and just try and go through some picks and main talking points, and again leave a lot of the heavy lifting to the comments, and then it will be business as usual for the Game Week 7 preview. So yeah, best of luck for Game Week 5, and until next time, stay sure.